I'm going to start today talking in a little more detail about the eight awarenesses of the enlightened person. And last week, I talked about all eight of them in general. And today's topic is having few desires. It's the first of the eight awarenesses. So the Buddha is recorded as saying that those who have many desires seek for fame and profit, and there is much suffering. Those who have few desires look around less and desire little. Those who have few desires do not have to flatter in order to ingratiate themselves with others. Also, they withstand temptations from various sense organs. One who practices having few desires has neither worry nor fear, for his mind is peaceful. Whatever he comes into contact with, he finds that is enough, and he never lacks anything. Having few desires, he is in nirvana. This is called having few desires. As you know, we desire all kinds of things. But I like that it says having few desires, because if we had no desires, what would motivate us? So I think that there are healthy desires and unhealthy desires. In Buddhist parlance, they say right desires, but I prefer healthy, because it means that what we're doing is for the benefit of not only ourselves, but everybody, and the planet as well. So, as I mentioned, I think last time, one of the precautions at Sesshin is not to look around. And as a Buddha said, not looking around can mean having few desires. But if we look at ourselves carefully, we see all kinds of desires, and yet, ultimately, there's nothing to gain. At the same time, there's nothing to lose either. All things are the undisguised manifestation of truth. So if we live in the present moment, there's no room for worry, upset, and aggravation. Unfortunately, our minds are always dwelling in the past or fantasizing about the future. And by being attentive, we can stay grounded and in the present. And the mind will settle into a state of rest, where it's balanced and not grasping after what we perceive to be pleasant and pushing away what we perceive to be unpleasant. As the mind settles down, we can experience our life, the situation, and the people in it without tension of attachment or aversion. So in order for the mind to settle down, we need to avoid looking around. Of course, we have to look around when we're driving, so to avoid an accident and make sure we know the route that we're following. But I'm talking about looking around during Zazen. It doesn't mean just physically looking around, turning your head and looking at everything. It means in your own thoughts. Is your mind wandering and looking around? although we emphasize it during Zazen and in Sesshin, awareness and attentiveness are not limited to Zazen. We should extend our Zazen mind into all of our activities, especially when we're working or Samu. Zazen mind is appropriate in every moment, whether we're standing, sitting, lying down, eating, or working. Every moment, we can maintain Zazen mind to live completely and wholeheartedly. There's two stories I want to share from Dogen's Tenzo Kyoken, which is translated as instructions to the head cook or the chief cook. And they illustrate the state of being awareness and not looking around. And Dogen also wrote about this in a travelogue, you might call it. He wrote called Hokioki, which means travels to China. As you know, he went to China, and this is where these stories come from when he was in China. He said, during my stay at Tiantung Monastery, a priest named Lu was in the office of the Tenzo. One day I found him earnestly drying up some mushrooms in the front of the Buddha hall with a bamboo stick in his hand and without a sledge hat on his head. The sun was shining down upon his head and the paving tiles were parched in the sun. In profuse perspiration, he was strenuously drying the mushrooms, here and there. He seemed to me rather painful. His spine was bent with age like a bow. His long eyebrows were white like the feathers of a crane. I went up to him and said, "What is your Buddhist age?" 68 was his answer. I know some of us in the room here are older than that, 68. So, but why don't you make the serving monks or underworkers do this work? Why don't you have your assistants do the work for you? And he replied, "They are not me." Said, "You are really one with Buddhism, but I wonder why you work so hard in such a scorching sun." And he said, "When else can I do it except now?" You know, and Dogen, was quite impressed with this monk. He didn't worry about the hot sun and perspiration. He was just doing what his job called for and what he had to do in order to feed the monks in the monastery. And then Dogen related another time when a 60-year-old priest came aboard our ship. This was the ship when he was sailing from Japan to China. And the priest asked the Japanese passengers if they had any mushrooms. He called them Cotinellus mushrooms. And I served him with some tea and asked him where he lived. And he was the cook, the Tenzo priest at a large monastery. And he said to me, "Tomorrow is Bodhidharma Memorial Day. I have no such foodstuffs as all monks there can enjoy on that day." I thought of cooking vermicelli soup, but I found that there was no Cotinellus mushrooms to go with it. I came all the way expecting to get some mushrooms for the monks from all parts of our country. And I asked him, "When did you leave the monastery?" And he said, "After lunch." And I said, how far is it from here? And he said, about 6 ri, which is about 14 miles. He says, when do you go back? I'm going back as soon as I can get some Cortinellus mushrooms. And Dogen said, how glad I am to see you unexpectedly and have a long chat with you about Buddhism. I will serve you, Zen Master Tenzo. And the Tenzo said, that's too bad. Without my direction, tomorrow's meal will not go well. And Dogen said, in such a great place as your monastery, there must be some other cooking monks who are capable to prepare the meals. I believe they can make such meals without you, without your single Tenzo priest. And the monk replied, old as I am, I hold the office of Tenzo. This is the training of my old age. How can I leave this duty to others? Moreover, I didn't get leave for a night's lodging out when I left there. And then Dogen said, Reverend Sir, why don't you do Zazen or read the koans of ancient persons? What is the use of working so hard as a Tenzo priest? On hearing these remarks, he burst into laughter and said, good foreigner, you seem to be ignorant of the true training and characters of Buddhism. So Dogen, actually the dialogue goes on much longer. Dogen asks him what the true characters are, and then he met this Tenzo priest later on his journeys in China, and he had some more understanding. But as many of you know, Dogen spent about 3 years in China, and he finally met his true teacher, and then went back to Japan and established the Soto school of Zen in Japan. And I think I talked about this during Sesshin. He wrote in great detail how to maintain mindfulness, doing all kinds of things in the monastery, from eating to cooking to brushing your teeth to taking a bath. Everything is focused on practice. So if you listen to the stories of these old Tenzos, you see that they weren't looking around expecting something else. And that's when Dogen said, all things are the undisguised manifestation of truth. It was right there, but he didn't see the importance of the whole practice, just of sitting and studying. So during Sesshin, our responsibility is to follow the precautions and to not look around. And having few desires, we can really be who we are. And being so, we can practice continuously and accomplish continually. So my teacher, Maizumi Roshi, articulated the major desires that get people into difficulty. And the desire for wealth and the desire for material things, which means a desire for form, and he includes in there a desire for sex, which is a desire for form. And then a desire for food, and a desire for fame, and a desire for sleep. And so, of course, we need food and sleep in order to be healthy, but how much do we need? And these desires can mask our practice. And as I mentioned, there are healthy desires, such as alleviating suffering or helping others. But these can turn into pride and conceit if we're not careful. So what veils our wisdom is delusions. And a lot of these delusions arise from desires. And we talk about the three poisons in our tradition: greed, hatred, and ignorance. And they are certainly delusions that arise from desires. Sometimes three more are added, which are conceit and doubt, which is kind of a skepticism, and wrong views, not seeing things clearly. Or I've heard of other poisons, which are conceit and pride and sloth, just being lazy. Yeah. It's interesting, when I was training at the Zen Center of LA, it's one of the ways Maizumi Roshi trained us, is to really respond immediately to the needs, whatever they are, And so if he had guests over and he had attendants, and the guests, their cup was getting low, he expected the attendant to jump up and refill it. Usually with Maizumi Roshi, the cup had sake in it, so he had to be running around taking care of everybody. But it's also interesting too that people who acquire fame and wealth, I don't know if they're any happier than people who don't have all these things. I mean, certainly you need enough in order to satisfy your basic needs. But when I think of all of the famous, extremely famous people who committed suicide, it's sad, I mean, in my generation, of course, those famous ones were Marilyn Monroe and Elvis Presley, who were icons. They're known around the world, And then later on, there were others, like Robin Williams. I don't know, Jim Morrison. It's probably a long list. I've been following the January 6th hearings, and here's former President Trump, very wealthy man, claims to be a billionaire, was president of the United States, just had unlimited power. Doesn't seem to be a very happy person to me. Yeah. So I was just struck by when he'd get upset with what his underlings would tell him while I was eating lunch. Quite often the plates were thrown against the wall. So there we go. There's the poison of anger, greed, ignorance. So desire to be right. We want to win every argument with our spouse or our partner, our co-workers. And how many things do we believe that if we sit down and look at them carefully are dubious whether they're true or not? And we have a strong desire to be admired and loved too. So that's why I really like the saying of my teacher, Maizumi Roshi. He always said, appreciate yourself. In fact, there's a book of his writings. The title of it is Appreciate Yourself. Appreciate yourself. If we really appreciate ourselves, then we'll have few desires. It's only because we don't appreciate ourselves, we want ourselves to be different. But the amazing thing is, until we learn to appreciate ourselves, even with all of our perceived flaws, there's no chance, that we'll be able to transform. As long as we reject ourselves, then we're kind of congealing the way we are, fossilizing it. So appreciate ourselves. So when we can appreciate ourselves, then truly we can have few desires. So I didn't have a lot to say today about this. So that's all I prepared. But let's see if anybody wants to comment or look at your own life and say, how does this first awareness of having few desires play out?